Okay, folks, this is another session here, another interview we're doing for Book Talk with Corbin. I'm your host. And once again, we have one of our frequent guests, David Horowitz, absolutely phenomenal individual. Buy his books. You know, I just went to Amazon.com and I wanted to do it one more time to explain to our listeners how to buy his, how to go to Amazon.com and buy his books. Just go to Amazon.com. There in the search engine at the very top, just put in David Horowitz and his books will come up. And buy them. I mean, it's just that simple. Buy them. And one of the books, the brother we're going to talk about today is Dark Agenda. Brother Horowitz, you know, given all that's been happening around the country, you're saying that Dark Agenda is really the one book that's sort of exposing what's happening. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. The subtitle is The War to Destroy Christian America. And the first thing that I point out in the book is that all the freedoms that we cherish, all the values that we hold dear, equality, liberty, tolerance, inclusion, all originated as Christian values and Protestant Christian values at that. 98% of the people who settled America were Protestant Christians and who created this country. Before the Protestant Reformation, you could only get to heaven by going through the Catholic Church and its priesthood. In other words, there was between you and God were these intermediaries, the priests, and they could, it went so far that you had to pay to get out of, if you were going to go to purgatory and wanted to get into heaven, you had to pay the church. And the Protestant reformers really revolted against this. And they understood that the church, every Protestant church, every church is a human institution, and therefore it's subject to human corruption. So they came up with this revolutionary idea. A central doctrine of the Protestant Reformation was the priesthood of all believers. And what that means is that every individual created by God has a one-to-one relationship with his or her maker. There are no intermediaries, no ministers, no priests, no churches. They can give you advice, but it's human advice. It's not. They're not divinely inspired, or they don't speak for God. And this revolutionary idea immediately makes everybody equal. That radical idea of equality comes from Protestant Christianity. And it included, of course, Black slaves. So that's why, and in the atmosphere we're in today, which is poisonous, attacking, it's open season on white people and on America's founding. That's why Protestant Christians, white Protestant Christian males, this is the historical reality, led the fight against slavery out of this doctrine that in God's eyes, whatever our station in life, we're all equal. And as the American Declaration of Independence says, every human being has a God-given right to liberty, which cannot be taken away by government. And the sad fact is, of course, that there was slavery in Africa for 1,000 years before a white person ever set foot there. And that every Black slave in America was enslaved in Africa by Black Africans and sold at slave auctions. I have to emphasize this because everything has been so turned around in our culture today. People talk idiot stuff like about white supremacy. We have the most egalitarian society in history. Black people aren't marginalized, which is the word they use since they can't come up with a definition of oppression. Black people aren't marginalized in America. They're the center of the nation's attention. Black people dominate, for example, just athletics, which is where all our kids get their heroes, dominate our popular culture. You can't turn on the TV without seeing integrated couples. I mean, this is a remarkable period in human history. And the left and the Democrat Party is busy talking about systemic racism. There is no systemic racism in police departments. How do I know this? Because in 1964, the Civil Rights Act outlawed systemic racism, outlawed institutional racism. Mm-hmm. Now, assume the way Democrats seem to, that every white person is a racist. There are thousands of Black attorneys, thousands of Black prosecutors. There are Black judges. There are Black attorney generals. There are Black police chiefs in our major cities. If there was institutional racism, there would be lawsuits all over the place. There aren't, because there isn't. That's the reality. Where these riots took place, like in Minneapolis, where they started, every member of the city council is a Democrat or a Green Party member. There's one Green Party member. The attorney general of the state is a Black Democrat. I could just go, the mayor is a Democrat. Right. It's insanity. The police chief is a Democrat and Black in Minneapolis. I don't want to go into the whole George Floyd thing, but It is absurd that we have a white supremacist culture. And who is getting hurt by this? But mainly poor Black people. There is a Black community that is underprivileged and, at the margins. It's in the inner cities. And who controls all the major inner cities in America? Who controls 100% Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, where all the murders are taking place of Black people? Democrats. And they have 100% control of those cities and have for 50 to 100 years. So naturally, they're screaming racist at Republicans because they don't want people to look at them. Anyway, my book, Dark Agenda, is about this great divide in our country between people who are, the odd thing about this book is that I'm an agnostic, non-observant Jew defending Christianity. But that's because I realized you can't have an inalienable right to liberty. Inalienable meaning it can't be taken away unless it's God-given. If it's given by governments, the next political regime will take it away from you. Yeah. So once I realized that, I realized the assault on Christianity is really an assault on America. And that's what my book, Dark Agenda, is about.
Folks, I just wanted to remind you, we are interviewing David Horowitz, the author of Dark Agenda. You go to Amazon.com and get a copy of that. Please do get a copy of that. And replay this podcast several times. What that brother has just said in the past few minutes is very, very important. Mr. Horowitz, one thing you brought up, my father was actively involved in the civil rights movement through the Urban League. And I think many of the things you just stated, accomplishments, he would be astounded to see right now. Yeah, absolutely astounded.
They're miraculous. It's the greatest social revolution in the history of the world, really, yes. What's happened in the last 50 years. And the civil rights movement, if you look at the videos of the civil rights movement, they show you how terrible Black Lives Matter is and how uncivil rights they are. There's no violence. The violence is all by racist cops against peaceful demonstrators in suits and ties, for crying out tears. There's no looting. There's no violence committed by the civil rights people. And of course, that's because Martin Luther King insisted on nonviolence as the principle of the movement. It was a very moral movement. Today's movement is just exploiting the race. Actually, it's an imaginary race issue. If you look at 95% of the so-called victims of police brutality, according to Black Lives Matter, they're all career criminals who are armed. and resisting arrest. And who do they prey on? Who do black criminals prey on? Black people. The murder rates have soared. They're up 30%. Black Lives Matter has killed, through its influence, more black people, than the racist officers that may be out there. The true racial killing, which was of the jogger, was committed not by a cop, an ex-cop, a vigilante. That's where the racism is unchecked. Not in the cops who have been indicted for murdering George Floyd. Just to go back to that case, one of them's African American who joined the force to make it better in race relations. The other was an Asian American. How does race factor into whatever happened to George Floyd? It doesn't. It doesn't. But these leftists want to use the race issue as a club to beat America to death. They're Marxists. That's what they are.
Oh yeah, and that's the one thing that it sort of surprises me too when I speak to some folk, even Black Christians. They become very indignant when I say to them, "Well, Black Lives Matter is a self-avowed Marxist organization." Am I wrong on that?
Anti-family too. Yeah, no, these are communists. These are admirers of Fidel Castro. It's just terrible. I hold responsible all those white people, and particularly the white corporate America that's pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into these criminals, is what I look at Black Lives Matter people as. And exploiting that. It's like, look, it's like Jack Horner in the corner, pulled out a plum, said, what a good boy am I. And you turn on your TV, there are, black channels or making blacks victims. And instead of, the triumphs of what's happened over the last 50 years, it's just quite amazing. In America, the statistics are amazing. In 1958, something like 87% of white Americans were against interracial marriages. And today it's like 4%. 4% believe that Elvis is alive and on the moon.
Right.
It's so normal when you think. I mean, if you have a historical memory or are old enough, a black man and a white woman was, dangerous territory.
Yes.
Now, black husbands, white wives, white husbands, black wives, white couples, black children, black couples, white children, Asian children. It's just, it's over. The race, it's alive in the Democrat Party. And you have the President of the United States saying that systemic racism touches every aspect of American life. No, I'll tell you where there's systemic racism. Mm-hmm. It's the inner city schools that the Democrat Party controls, and they trap poor minority kids in these schools. They won't give them the scholarships, the voucher. They'll fight to the death against vouchers. So they can't find a school. Their parents can't find a school that'll teach them. And we know year in and year out for 50 years, there's no surprises here. 40% of the kids in those like Chicago schools, the minority kids in the inner city schools, drop out. They don't graduate. And 40% who graduate are functionally illiterate. They don't have the skills to succeed in a society which is really, it's not only open to black people, but there's all this encouragement. There's scholarships. You have to say it. Blacks get hired first. Anybody who's out there knows that, but they can't take advantage of these opportunities because they haven't been educated. And they haven't been educated because the Democrat Party is running those schools for the adults. It's just terrible.
That's a powerful statement you just made right there. They're running the schools for the adults, not for the young people.
Yeah.
And
that's how they even defend themselves when it's pointed out. How can the Chicago teacher unions be on strike now and not willing to open the schools when you know that all those kids in the inner city, they don't have fathers, that if they have working mothers, there's nobody to take care of them. They're going to get out on the streets, and who's on the streets? The gangs. I mean, they're just destroying young Black lives, the teacher unions. And they defend themselves when we're defending the teachers. And how can you defend those teachers anyway? Here you have all these healthcare workers who risked their lives before the vaccines. They went into hospitals, they took care of COVID patients. The science shows that kids don't transmit the COVID disease. It's really safe for those teachers, and they're refusing to go into the schools, but they're taking their paychecks. I mean, I have never had such a low opinion of teachers in this country as in this, crisis now. And I have to say that I don't agree with anything that Lori Lightfoot probably stands for or says, but right now she's taking a heroic stand against the teacher unions. I'm 100% behind her in that.
Who is Lori Lightfoot?
The mayor? Black mayor of Chicago.
Chicago, yes. Well, yeah, okay. Now I recall. Yeah. So when someone like you says that's quite of an endorsement.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clear.
Oh,
and I have to agree with you.
Tear my hair out over Lori Lightfoot. But she's doing a terrible job with the criminality.
Right.
That's another thing. The Democrat Party is pro-criminal. They they open the jail. Why are they letting convicted criminals of violent crimes out of jails during COVID, for crying out tears? Well, they're letting them in the street. They go out and they murder people and rob them. There's this epidemic now of carjackings done by 12-year-olds in the inner city. I read a horrible case about a 12-year-old Black kid who hauled an elderly Black lady out of her car to steal her car and beat her up. The only protection, all these middle class, they're rich. I mean, Kamala Harris is a millionaire. Nancy Pelosi's a millionaire. They live in gated communities. They have private government security. The vulnerable people who need the police are Black people in the inner city. And,
Amen.
Amen. And these leftists want to defund that.
Amen. Speaking to my listeners now, folks, this is David Horowitz, New York Times bestselling author. He's written a book, Dark Agenda. Please go to Amazon.com and get that book immediately. Mr. Horowitz, I heard that your book, Dark Agenda, has already sold 100,000 copies. Is that correct?
That's correct. And they're printing another 50,000. I don't get any reviews, of course, because the New York Times and the Washington Post are all leftists. And they're supporting this race. The Democrat Party has become a race party. Identity politics is racism. Well, and it's the worst kind of racism. I mean, Kamala Harris, she's posing as a Black person. Yeah, she's half Black. Her father was Jamaican. Her grandfather was a slave owner. But Asian Americans, which is what, it's her, her parents split up. It's her mother who's the Indian, the Asian. Asian Americans are richer than white Americans as a group.
Yes.
As a group. So it just destroys. We have to look at people as individuals. I mean, it's the whole idea that Martin Luther King championed of judging people on their merits, on their character, on their individual worth, not on race.
And that goes back to what you said earlier about the Christian roots of this country in saying,
exactly
emphasizing.
The Christian idea that we're all children of God. That's the idea enshrined in our Declaration of Independence.
Yes.
That we have all these rights thanks to God. And the Democrat Party is reversing that. They're doing it with this transgender nonsense too. They have a bill called the Equality Act. I mean, I hate them just for the way they name their bills. The Equality Act really isn't that. What it is they're going to make it a law that that biological males who think of themselves as female but have the physical power of males because they're biologically males can compete in women's sports, can go into women's bathrooms. I mean, you can imagine the havoc that that's going to cause, can go into homeless shelters pretending that they're women. They're not women. I mean, if they want to have transgendered homeless shelters, that's fine with me. I don't have any bias against the transgendered person, but this law would make if a person says they're a male or female, no matter what their biology is, no matter what their physical structure is, you have to recognize them as that, or you go to jail. I mean, that's the new law. And what it's done is it's making the state the moral authority in place of God. Our whole system is based on the idea that we have basic rights that don't come from government, they come from God. That's our moral authority. And of course, abortion, it's like over 1 million Black babies have been aborted.
Yes.
Planned Parenthood was founded by a racist, Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist. And Planned Parenthood's abortion centers, because that's what they do. They're not planning parenthood. They don't have adoption agencies. It's because there's a ton of money in abortions, selling body parts, and it's just disgusting. But they built the Planned Parenthood centers in Black neighborhoods deliberately, because her idea was her eugenics idea. This is horrifying. It was Hitler's idea too, is that people should be bred like animals. Mm-hmm. So defective people, we should find ways to prevent defective people from being born. That's what Planned Parenthood is about. And she regarded Black people as defective morally or whatever. It's everything is so upside down. So upside down.
Well, if speaking to my listeners, if we would read,
I mean, there are so many people desperate to adopt children, you know, mm-hmm. And why are these Black babies being aborted? They should be adopted. Why isn't the government funding huge adoption centers and go rescue them? Well, they can't because the laws the Democrats have put in place and ensure abortion as a fundamental right. It's horrifying. It's just horrifying.
And speaking to my listeners, we can't get a better grasp of what has created this confusion, what has created this horror, when you buy and read Dark Agenda by David Horowitz. I highly recommend this book. Please go to Amazon.com, buy a copy, read it, review it, share it with your friends. Go on your Facebook page, whatever social media you have, and share your thoughts and views about this important book, Dark Agenda by David Horowitz. Brother Horowitz, I have to cut it short. I have to stop right now. You know, you're the type of interview where a person can go on for hours. You just have so much wisdom and knowledge and information. That's why I always look forward to doing an interview with you.
Anytime, Corbin.